All right, good morning. This time, building a practice routine that works for you. Info session number 4, if that matters to you. So, a little bit of a welcome, a little bit of an intro. First up, some things about me. I'm not a speech pathologist, so I don't have a degree, I don't have a master's, I'm not a doctor in this. And I'm also not a career professional. This is not what I do for my living. I've been practicing teaching vocal feminization for about 8 months now, and I am working with a mentor who's helping me learn how to teach better. I also have 20 plus years of vocal experience. That's things like singing, acting, voice acting, content creation, all sorts of other stuff. So I've got lots of practice at changing and sort of adapting, adjusting my voice, which really helped me when it came to vocal feminization and learning how to do that kind of thing. And finally, I am currently learning to teach from a career professional. She does this as her day job. She's actually currently in the process of getting her degree to be a speech pathologist. Good for her. And she's been mentoring me since I finished working with her on my own vocal feminization to teach me how to teach you. So, tips for healthy practice, and we will go over a fair number of these as we get into the rest of the session today. Always make sure that you're warming up before you start. Doesn't matter how much you plan to do, 2 minutes, 20 minutes, 2 hours. Always warm up. Even just a little bit makes a big difference. We want to make sure that we're not hurting our voices. Keep hydrated. Water is your best option for this. Anything else is going to be sort of less ideal than water. Water hydrates you and doesn't cause any sort of side effects that we're not looking for. Milk can cause a film in the back of your throat. Anything carbonated can cause some irritation. Anything caffeinated can dry you out. Same with sugar. So stick to water as much as you can. If you feel any pain, strain, or tension, make sure to stop right away. Make sure to give yourself lots of time to recover, lots of time to rest before you start working on this again. I usually recommend, starting again the next day, unless you're very aware of what your vocal stamina is like, at which point you can sort of use your own best judgment as to when a good time to start up again would be. And finally, don't catch a swallow. There's lots of exercises out there, lots of videos out there that would say, hey, you can use this as a means to determine where your larynx should go. Don't do this. It's dangerous. It can cause a lot of strain on the vocal tract, and in the worst case, it can cause pain and choking. So super don't do this. Finally, the way I was taught to do this and the way I pass on information is to have whoever's learning go to sort of the extreme end first and then tune things back down. That won't be super relevant for today's session just because it is sort of more on the structure of how to practice than what you're actually practicing. But just for general knowledge, if you're going to look at other videos after this or if you've been working with me before, that's sort of the general method that I use. So, we're going to break this down into 3 pieces. The first one is healthy, the next one is helpful, the last one is consistent. Those are the 3 things you want your practice to be whenever you're doing it. So healthy, starting with warming up. We were talking about this just a second ago. It doesn't matter how much you plan to do. You always want to be warming up. Even just a short warm up to get yourself into the spot where you're feeling nice and comfortable, your voice is feeling relaxed, and you're in a good spot to sort of start working on harder or more in-depth exercises. That's the kind of thing you want. That's the kind of thing you want to be working on before you do any session. You also want to make sure that you know sort of what your body's signals are for, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to work a little harder now. So that could be feelings of relaxation in the chest and throat. That could be feelings of better airflow. That could be feelings of just sort of mental readiness for the session you're about to have. It's all up to you, but make sure you sort of pay attention to these as you go. Warming up does include mental preparation, so this is going to be something that's tough. It's very frustrating in a lot of cases, it can take a long time, and it also causes a lot of vocal dysphoria for people as they're learning, especially when they're just starting out. Your voice isn't going to sound the way you want it to right away. You're going to have to make a lot of sounds that you don't love to get to the sounds that you do like. So make sure you give yourself some time to sort of prepare yourself for the fact that that's going to be a part of your session, and to let it sort of roll off as much as you possibly can. Finally, warming up does include taking care of the rest of your body. So keeping yourself hydrated, keeping yourself fed, keeping yourself rested. It's going to make a big difference to the quality of your voice, even if you're feeling all right, but those things are not quite in the spot that they usually are. It's going to change the way that you sound, both in terms of the way that you hear yourself. You're going to be more critical if you're not in as good a mood, if you're a little bit more tired, if you're a little more hungry, but you're also going to be in a spot where you're not as bodily able to produce the sound that you're looking for if you're not taking care of yourself. This doesn't mean that you can't do a session when you're not in perfect form. Don't let sort of, a little bit of lost sleep or anything like that stop you from practicing every day. but be aware of the differences it will make to you as you're practicing if you're missing out on any of the things that you need to take care of yourself. I went back, my bad. Next up, body signals, things we want to pay attention to as we're practicing to make sure that we take care of ourselves. First one is pain. If you feel any pain, stop right away. That's a good sign that you've sort of overdone it, a good sign that, it's time to stop for the day, a good sign that you're either doing something in a way that isn't helpful or you're doing something too much. You'll want to make sure you take your time, again, like we were talking about at the beginning, take time to rest, take time to sort of let whatever it is that's causing that discomfort fade away, let it recover, and then start again the next day is generally my recommendation. If you get to the point where it sort of fades faster than that, you can give it another shot, but pay extra attention to where you were feeling that pain before just to see if it comes back. The other thing you want to be careful of here is if you feel pain when it comes to the same exercises every time. If that's the case, you may be either one, overdoing it, which is going back to the rest point that we were just making, time to take a rest, or you may be doing the exercise in a way that isn't super healthy for the voice. There are ways to do even the best exercises that aren't quite what we're looking for and can cause vocal issues. So we want to make sure that if a certain exercise always causes us some amount of pain, that we want to either adjust to a different exercise or change the way we're doing that exercise to make sure it doesn't cause us pain going forward. We want to be able to do everything we're doing pain-free. Strain is another one. This one's a little bit less of a warning signal than pain. Generally speaking, strain comes from working on something you haven't worked on before and trying new things, doing new things with the muscles in your throat, in your mouth, and that kind of thing. This is the kind of thing that typically comes up after longer sessions or, practicing for longer than you ever have before. So be wary of things like your throat starting to get a little bit scratchy or your jaw starting to get a little bit stiff, needing to clear your throat, needing to cough a little bit, that kind of thing. These are all pretty good indicators of strain. Strain is not the kind of thing where you need to be analyzing every time you do your session whether or not you need to change exercises or adjust the exercise you're working on. It's more of a kind of thing that sort of indicates to you, okay, we've had a hard session, we've been working really hard, time to take a break, time to relax, time to let ourselves recover and let that sort of information and practice internalize before we start working on this again. Take lots of water, take lots of rest. Those are the best ways to sort of reduce your vocal strain. Next up, tension, which comes in two parts. First one, physical tension. If you're feeling tension in your shoulders, if you're feeling tension in your neck, tension in your jaw, tension in your mouth, tension anywhere really, you want to make sure that you adjust what you're doing and how you're doing it. You want to be sure that you're not causing that tension in a way that is avoidable. So if you're sort of holding your jaw tense as you're doing all your exercises, try and work on sort of relaxing the muscles that keep that jaw tense, maybe even sort of massage those muscles on the side of your head. Do whatever you need to do to help those muscles relax. It's an important one to think about when you're finished with your session on how to sort of let that tension go. And it's an important one to think about as you're doing your session too, on how to do your exercises without causing yourself physical tension. If you're feeling physical tension, keep an eye on it. As long as it's not unbearable, you're okay to keep going. But make sure that once it gets to the point where it's starting to feel uncomfortable, you stop, you rest, you give yourself time to recover, you give yourself time to relax. The same is true of mental tension. So we were talking about before how this can be frustrating, this can be tiring, this can be tedious, all those kinds of things. When it comes to frustration especially, we want to make sure that we work hard on what it is that we find challenging. We want to practice the things that we're having difficulty with because that'll give us the most sort of practice and progress. But we also want to make sure that we're not working ourselves up into a froth, not getting to a point where we're so frustrated that we're not really making progress or we're making mistakes that sort of were pieces that we already worked on. We want to make sure that that frustration doesn't compromise the value and the sort of quality of our practice sessions. So if you find yourself getting sort of mentally tense, take some deep breaths, meditate if that's something you want to do. Give yourself a bit more of a moment between exercises or between repetitions of an exercise. Give yourself lots of time during your practice session if you can to sort of let yourself relax before moving on to the next thing. And if you find that that's not going away with a little bit of extra time for yourself, a little bit of extra kindness to yourself, that's a good sign to stop for the day. Give yourself time to sort of unpack it, think about it, not have to deal with whatever it was that was frustrating you for a while, and then come back to it refreshed the next day. Finally, emotional distress. We were talking about how this can be very dysphoric for people when they start out. That's true for most people, almost everyone, not everyone, you can't say everyone, but it's close. It's just about everybody will feel some amount of emotional distress as they're starting to practice vocal feminization. You're going to speak in a way that isn't the sort of target voice you were aiming for. You're going to speak in a way that sounds like that old voice. Habits will pop up, things will be frustrating, it'll be difficult, and you'll feel uncomfortable. That's largely the case for every person who does this. We want to make sure that we're ready for that kind of thing to happen. We want to make sure that we let that sort of happen. We don't sort of say, oh, well, I'm working on vocal feminization, so I shouldn't feel dysphoria. You absolutely will. It's a thing that happens with the practice. You're going to make sounds you don't like. Give yourself time to sort of let that fade. And if it's not fading after a certain amount of time within your practice sessions, it's time to take a break, time to rest, time to stop, time to give yourself time to let that go and come back to it the next day a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more sort of ready to take it on again. We don't want to be causing ourselves emotional distress because sort of in the same vein as frustration, that's going to sort of take away from the quality of our exercises. So we want to make sure that we're coming to it with as good a mindset, as good a headspace as we possibly can. Next section, helpful stuff. Which exercises should we do? There is no correct order, there is no required number of repetitions, and you shouldn't overload yourself. So let's go over those things in more detail. First up, there's no correct order. What exercises should I do? The ones that make sense to you. Generally speaking, you want to make sure that you're focusing especially on the ones that are a little bit tough for you, a little bit tricky still. But if you're in a day where you have very low energy and you just want to get through your voice practice, a couple of repetitions of an exercise you know really well that works well for you is a totally good way to go. There is no correct order to do your exercises in. Some people like to do all of their larynx work at once, then all of their mouth space work at once, then all of their vocal weight work at once. Some people like to hop around. Some people like to sort of, record themselves and hear what's going on that day, and then try a couple of things, record themselves again, try a couple of things. That can be bouncing around from piece to piece to piece, from resonance to weight to pitch to weight to mouth space to resonance, like bouncing all over the place. And that's totally fine too. Doing it in that sort of nice blocky way and doing it in that sort of nice improvised sort of free-flowing way of one to the next is just as valid. There's no correct order to do your exercises in. Likewise, you don't have to do resonance then weight then pitch, or pitch then mouth space then resonance. There's no correct order to do these things in. It's whatever makes sense to you. There's no required number of reps. You don't have to do 50 whisper sirens for it to be valid. It's not like stretching where, doing anything less than 30 seconds isn't getting you a lot of progress. Every time you do any of these exercises, you're learning a little bit, you're progressing a little bit, you're changing your voice a little bit, and you're learning how to adjust those different pieces of your voice such that they make it sound the way you want to. So there's no required number. 1 is a great number. 1 is a perfect number. 1 is more than 0, and that's what we're looking for. We want to make sure that you're getting a little bit of practice in every day. I'll talk about that later. And there is no required number of reps. So if you find that something's really wearing you out, 1 or 2, that's totally enough. Finally, don't overload your brain. Generally speaking, when I teach people, I try and teach people one piece at a time. So we'll talk about resonance first, and we'll go over a bunch of resonance exercises, and we'll make sure that you're getting nice and comfortable, nice and familiar with those exercises before you start moving on to something else. This gives you lots of time to make that a bit more of a habit, a bit more of a sort of automatic thing that you don't have to think about so much. So that when we move on to the next piece, you're not really thinking about resonance so much anymore. You're still adjusting it here and there. You're still focusing on it now and again. But by and large, you can focus on the next thing, whatever it happens to be, without having to pay as much attention to your resonance all the time anyway. So don't overload your brain. Don't be in a spot where you're sort of getting more frustrated or getting more worn out because your sessions are full of all sorts of different information that you're trying to keep track of all at once. Doing just one thing in a session is totally valid. Highly recommended some days. The other part of helpful is variety. We want to practice exercises that target different aspects of the voice. So I was just talking about how doing a session that's just focused on resonance is a great idea, and it is. But we want to make sure that that next session isn't also just exclusively resonance, especially if we have pieces that work on other aspects of the voice, like weight or pitch or mouth space or that kind of thing. If you don't have the variety yet, that's totally okay too. You may just be in the early days, As you get to the point where you get more of those pieces, then you'll want to start doing either multiple pieces in one session, or making sure that your sessions change subject to subject if you're doing all one session on all one subject. We also want to make sure that we practice different exercises in different sessions. So again, if you have that variety, this is for you. So for example, if I do a whisper siren in one session, the next session maybe I want to try a different resonance exercise, maybe some vowel shifting, maybe big dog, small dog instead. That way we get a better idea and a larger sort of breadth of knowledge and a larger breadth of experimentation with those different pieces of the voice. Gets us a little bit more familiar with all of the different ways that we can change it and some of the different ways that we can make those muscles work. Use different sounds or words if the exercise that you're working on allows. So for example, when we do a whisper siren, we often finish on a word just so we can get an idea of what that sort of nice, bright, resonant space sounds like when we speak. Change up what that word is. I usually use yeah, but sometimes I'll use all sorts of different words. Sometimes I'll use, no. Sometimes I'll use hello. Sometimes I'll use my name. Sometimes I'll use, any different variety of things. Sometimes I'll move into a sentence instead of a word if that's something you're more familiar with. So use different sounds or words if the exercise permits. And finally, focus on conversational speech. A lot of people will get into the point where they're sort of reading in their target voice, which is also good. That's a very important thing to practice. Reading out loud is tough. But we want to make sure that we're using our voice in a conversational way as well. This can be a little bit tricky because you don't always have someone to talk to. But if you can find any videos about, or can find any videos that are meant to be sort of a conversation starter or a conversation mimic, I highly recommend them. I've got one available if you need it. It should, I think, be on this channel as well. But just finding prompts to talk about your day, talk about what you're doing lately, what are your hobbies, what do you like to do on a first date, that kind of thing. Talk about things in conversational speech rather than reading them off. It really helps with getting yourself to the point where you can improvise in conversation much more effectively while still being able to manage your voice the way that you want to. A lot of people will get stuck in this sort of middle space of having all the information, but not quite being able to translate it to a conversation because they can't keep track of everything they're working on and speaking to another person in a sort of normal social context at the same time. So give yourself as much practice at that as you possibly can. Last piece is consistency. So the first thing we want to talk about is there is no minimum amount of time. 1 minute of practice a day is more than 0 minutes of practice a day. That's what we're looking for. We want you to practice a little bit every day, even if that means 2 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds. If you do 2 rounds of a warm-up and 1 round of an exercise, that's still valid and that's still more than you would have done if you'd done none. So we want to make sure that you're getting a little bit in every day. It makes you think about it, gets it sort of churning at the back of the mind, and it keeps your body sort of in the habit, in the process. It keeps you in the spot where you are able to activate it a little bit more easily the next time it comes up to you, the next time you have time to work on it. So there's no minimum amount of time. If you can only do 2 minutes today, great. Do those 2 minutes. Take it where you can get it. If you can do like 1 minute now, 1 minute later, and then 1 minute right before you go to bed, that's also good. Small sessions throughout your day, totally valid as well. Pick an amount of time you can do every day. That was what I was sort of talking about when it comes to there not being a minimum amount of time. If you can only find 5 minutes a day, do it 5 minutes every day. Do it 5 minutes wherever you can find that 5 minutes. But especially if possible, find 5 minutes where you can do it on each day. So if you can do 5 minutes right before you go to bed and the time you go to bed is relatively consistent, perfect. Put those 5 minutes in there every time right before you're going to bed. That'll help you keep it in routine. It'll help you get over those moments where you're feeling like, oh God, I really just don't want to do voice practice today. Well, I'll just do 5 minutes right before bed. It's what I always do, and then it'll be done and I can just go to sleep. Adding it to your routine will keep you consistent much more than basically anything else we're talking about here. Keeping it routine is super, super useful. And it'll make getting over that hurdle of, I don't really want to practice my voice today, way, way easier. So highly recommend finding a time every day that you can do it that's at least consistent, at least semi-similar, to make your voice training time. And finally, work your stamina up as you go, but don't overdo it. We don't want to be in a spot where we're wearing ourselves out and then can't practice for 2 days. We don't want to be losing our voice. We don't want to be causing any vocal damage. If you feel like, the usual amount of practice that you typically do is no longer the kind of thing that is pushing you to the limit of how much you can do without straining your voice, maybe you want to expand your session a little bit. Maybe practice for just a little bit longer and see if that's comfortable and workable for your voice. If it is, great. Maybe you start doing your practice sessions that long every time. If it's not, dial it back to where you were. All good. Don't overdo it is the big piece here. This is not like, going to the gym and getting those gains. We don't want to be sort of pushing through the pain. If you feel strain, pain, or tension, stop. Like we were talking about before, those are good signals from your body that it's time to cut it out. That stamina will come even if you don't ever feel pain, strain, or tension, as long as you're practicing consistently and getting better and better at sort of reducing the amount of overall work that the body has to do to maintain the same result. So your stamina will go up. Don't push it. Don't try and sort of force your way through the pain or anything like that. Don't be a hero. It will increase with time, I promise. And finally, resting. Hey, I've talked about resting a lot in this session. That's weird. It's because it's one of the most important parts of vocal feminization, and a lot of people don't talk about it. Always rest when you need. I'm going to say it again. Always rest when needed. This includes between exercises, so if you're having a practice session, if you want to, or if you feel like it's going to be helpful for you, take a breath in between each exercise. Finish your repetition of your exercise. Take a nice deep breath in, a nice deep breath out, and then do your repetition of your exercise again. Same thing with drinking water. Do repetition of the exercise, have a little sip of water. Do another repetition of the exercise, have another sip of water. It really helps with getting that hydration in, but it also really helps you with sort of taking some time in between each exercise or repetitions of the same exercise. Physical rest, always equally important to what you're doing in terms of mental rest. The quality of your voice will decrease a little bit when you're tired. This isn't to say that you can't practice when you're tired. It's just something to be aware of when you're practicing in a state where you're not quite at your sort of peak performance, when you're not in the ideal state to practice voice. You just want to be aware that your voice is going to sound a little bit different. There's going to be some changes about it that come from that tiredness. We just want to be aware of that and be kind to ourselves when we hear those differences. Be kind to ourselves when we're in a spot where we know we might be a little bit more critical because we're tired and a little bit grumpy. It's very important to be kind to yourself as you do this. It's very difficult. And again, like we were talking about, it can cause a lot of frustration and mental distress. So take it as easy on yourself as you possibly can. You and your body are working as a team here. So do the sort of best you can to be on that team with your body. And finally, when it comes to anything that has to do with being sick or affecting your voice in any way, take those days off. A sick voice is a strained voice, and we don't practice when our voice is strained. So take the time to be sick, take the time to rest, recover. Don't cause yourself any damage. Don't strain yourself. Practicing when you're sick is going to cause bad habits as well. If you're talking through a congested nose, you're going to start having nasal sounds coming up in there that you're just going to sort of not going to think about because you're sick. If you're in a spot where you've got a hoarse voice, you're going to have that sort of scratchy vocal fry sound. You don't necessarily want to add that to your voice if that's not something you're looking for. So don't practice while you're sick. Don't create those bad habits. Don't strain or damage your voice. Take that time to rest. Recovery is super, super important before you move on with more vocal feminization stuff. And I promise you'll get back to the point that you were at much quicker than you think you will after coming back from being sick for a while. So make sure you take that time. If you have any questions, I am in Yuko's Discord server. Oh, pardon me. So if you'd like to ask me any questions there, you're more than welcome to. I also try and check the comments of these videos as frequently as possible. So if you've got questions, you can put them there as well. I do also have a Ko-Fi if you'd like to contribute to me continuing to do this kind of stuff, but please don't feel obligated. This is not my living. This is not what I do to make my money to support my, my rent and that kind of thing. I know this is not financially accessible to a lot of people, and that's a big reason that I'm doing this. So I want it to be free for you if that's all you can manage. And even if you can manage more than that, I don't want you to feel like you have to contribute. So I'm more than comfortable if nobody ever donates. Leave it as it is. Do what feels right for you. Hopefully this was helpful for you. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm always happy to answer as much as I can, and I hope you're doing well. I'm super proud of you. Take good care of yourself today, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Okay, bye.